Hello, check. Mic check. Hello.
Firstly, we sang it lah. Good evening. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you, sir?
Wait.
Mr. Ankitla, do you have any PowerPoint presentation to share?
Yes, I have. So if you can allow me to share.
Yeah, sure. Okay, Mr. Ankitla, I made you present this.
Okay. Is my PowerPoint visible?
Yeah, it's visible, yeah.
Great.
Right, sir. So we'll start after 3 minutes, sir.
Sure.
Thank you. Just like, and a very good evening to all the participants here. May I first request everyone to kindly put your videos on and microphone on mute during the whole session. Thank you. Well, I'm Tenzin Legman, Assistant Program Coordinator of Tibet House, New Delhi, and welcome you all to our 17th session of today's virtual program, which is on Introduction to Buddhism. And once again, we are very glad and honored to have among us Mr. Angit Goyla, who will be speaking on hermeneutics, interpretative, and definite meanings today. So before we proceed, I would like to introduce our today's speaker. So Mr. Angitla is a student of Buddhism and has attended various teachings given at Tibet House, New Delhi, including the recently completed Nalanda Master's course. With a background in IT, Mr. Angit La currently works in the field of finance, and I now request Mr. Angit Goyal to kindly proceed the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Tenzila. Thanks a lot for your kind introduction. And I hope I'm clearly audible. I just wanted to confirm once.
Yes, sir. It's audible, sir.
Okay, great, great. So I welcome you all to this 17th session of the Introduction to Buddhism series, which very kindly initiated by Tibet House, New Delhi, in New Delhi, under the guidance of Venerable Geshe Dorji Namdulji. And I would like to thank Tibet House, Geshe, as well as all the staff for giving us opportunity to share whatever part of whatever we have learned over period of past few years under Geshe and yes, rather than this is more like a sharing session of the whatever we have understood, and of course I expect, please don't expect everything to be very accurate or correct, but to the best of, I would say, my understanding and knowledge, I would like to share the understanding of this topic of today. So, as you can all see, that today's topic is on hermeneutics, and which is related to the interpretative and definite meaning. So we'll be going into the detail of what do we mean. If some of you may already be familiar with these topics and what they mean, but we'll be touching the need of the hermeneutics in the study in the context of the Buddhist teachings. So looking at the dictionary meaning of hermeneutics, what do we mean by hermeneutics? So the English dictionary of Merriam-Webster dictionary says it's a method or principle of interpretation. And this definition it gives in the context of philosophy. So when we talk about hermeneutics in the context of the Buddha's teachings, what do we mean by, say, interpreting a Buddha's teachings, or what do we mean by teachings of Buddha being some teachings being definite or some being interpretable? So the question would arise, why do we need to interpret some teachings? And once we, as we progress along, we'll try to understand why the need arises. And once we understand that, yes, there are situations where we need to interpret some teachings of the Buddha. And there are some teachings, of course, we can't interpret all the teachings. Some teachings that do not need any interpretation, they are called definite. But how do we know that which are interpretable teachings and which are definite teachings? So this roughly will be the overall kind of the broad framework within which today's talk will be focusing on. So just to start from our very basic pursuit of even attending a Dharma teaching, or not just Dharma teachings, the every day-to-day life, whatever we do, all our activities are driven by our innate desire for reducing our suffering and to enhance our happiness. So our day-to-day, the worldly life, it is primarily, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, that it's focusing more on alleviating our physical suffering and enhancing our physical happiness. And so we turn more towards the spiritual direction when we seek more, when we intend to see more inwards towards our mental well-being. Then we see that just the material wealth and the material comforts alone, they do not suffice. And so when it comes to how to deal with our inner emotions, our inner peace and well-being, then we seek something, some area, or the who can tell us more about our own mind. So we see that the Buddha's teachings are the one of the traditions, or one of the systems where mind is studied in so much more detail and systematically. So with that in perspective, so what we seek is happiness, and here I'm talking more from the, say, mental well-being point of view, and we want to reduce our suffering. And what does our happiness or suffering, they depend very grossly. We can see that very grossly, they depend on our actions, how we behave in general. If we act under the influence of afflictions such as ignorance, such as say anger or attachment, or we by jealousy or driven by pride, these kind of emotions, we easily see that under the influence of such emotions, whenever we act, it does not make us happy in the long term. Maybe in short term we might attain what we want, what we wish. We might be able to subdue our enemy in the short term by anger, but long term, we are not at peace, we are not happy. So, what these gross emotions, these actions, what drives them? It's our basic thought process, the underlying thought process is how does our mind decide in what way to behave? So, based on our factors of how do we feel, how do we discriminate a particular situation, based on the information that we receive. So, based on so many these varied factors, our actions come into being, and which in turn lead to our happiness or suffering. So, as we go inward, we see that the mind, at the bottom of all of it's our mind, our mental processes of, say, discernment, and feelings and emotions. They play a very key important role. How our mind processes the information it receives and how it acts on it. So, in the context of when we talk about whether or not we can eliminate our suffering and achieve happiness, to what degree is it possible? Can we completely eliminate our suffering from its root so that it never arises again? And likewise, is it possible that we attain a state of happiness which is like maximum, leaving no room for dissatisfaction in that kind of thing? So uh, we say that it is possible once one is able to identify the root cause of suffering, which is said to be the ignorance. And by ignorance, we mean here is the mind or mental state whose apprehension of the objects is not in line with the reality. It's rather in opposition with the reality. So we identify the root cause of our suffering as ignorance. And this is what is very concisely and beautifully captured in this verse by Arya Nagarjuna in his text, Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way, which says, through ceasing of karma and afflictions, nirvana is achieved. So here, nirvana, or we can say enlightenment, has a connotation of the state where one has attained complete cessation of sufferings and attained the maximum possible happiness. And as the first line says, that it is achieved once one is able to cease the karma and afflictions. So here karma is not just any karma, but it refers to the non-virtuous or contaminated karmas which are driven by our afflictive mental states. So Arya Nagarjuna says that if one is able to eliminate these two or get rid of these two, yes, it is possible to attain such a state of absolute bliss and happiness and peace and nirvana. Now, how can we eliminate our karma and afflictions? Can we force them to stop? I mean, we know that it's not easy. Our habitual tendencies are so strong. Even if we may decide that, okay, I won't get angry for the next one day. We can force ourselves, we can suppress it to a very great degree, but we all know it's not that straightforward. So Arya Nagarjuna says that even the karma and afflictions, they have their own underlying causes. And here the second line says the karma and afflictions, they themselves are given rise to by distorted conceptions. So here distorted conceptions as a conception of false characterization of the objects, exaggeration of the reality. For example, it is said that when we are very angry with somebody, a person, that 70, 80 or maybe more percent of our anger is coming from our own mind. It's our own mental projection or interpretation of the situation. Only very slight is coming from the other side. So that has the connotation of the distorted conception or false characterization, or say when we are very attached to a person or an object, most of the qualities that we lay attribute to that object or person is what we are exaggerating in a way. So the afflictions and karma, Nagarjuna says, arise from such distorted conceptions. And these distorted conceptions, again, they don't arise in and on themselves, but they are in turn rooted on what is termed here in the third line. These arise from elaborations. Uh, Elaborations is nothing but it refers to the ignorance, as it is said, grasping of true existence. So at the underlying is our mental state of ignorance, whose view of the objects at the very root level is not in line with the reality. The way it views the object is in opposition of the reality, or different. It is in sorry. So it is not in line with the reality. So that is the underlying root cause for all, giving rise to the distorted conceptions, which in turn give rise to karmas and afflictions, which in turn give rise to our suffering. And is it possible to get rid of this ignorance which underlies all of this? So Arya Nagarjuna says, yes, it is possible. These ignorance or these elaborations can be seized, or we can stop them by the view of emptiness. Or one can say that by cultivating our mind, by cultivating in our mind the wisdom which sees the reality of the objects in the way they are, unlike the ignorance which distorts the reality. If we are able to cultivate the view which knows the reality at the subtlest level as it is, that is, cultivate the wisdom, then we can eliminate that ignorance once and for all, and thereby eliminating all our sufferings and attaining the highest state of bliss and happiness. And uh, as per the Arya Nagarjuna's, or the Buddhist view, the view which we say that the wisdom of emptiness is such wisdom to eliminate the subtlest of the ignorance. So here is the overall kind of structure of what the background of what we are pursuing by following a spiritual path. What is our motivation and goal, and is it possible to attain, and how we can attain that? So where did it all start in the context of the Buddha's teachings? For us, the historical Buddha appeared around, as we all know, around 25 years ago, 2500 years, 100 years ago. And he attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya in Bihar. And it is, we should all, it's quite encouraging to reflect that Buddha Shakyamuni was an ordinary being, Prince Siddhartha, before he actually attained enlightenment. And in fact, he had a family, wife, and a child, son Rahula. And then he came across the four sides, as we popularly know that. He came across an aging person, a sick person, and a dead person. And when he asked his the person who accompanied him, the charioteer Channa, he told him, Prince Siddhartha told Prince Siddhartha that this is inevitable for any being. Aging comes, it cannot be avoided. The sickness comes, cannot be avoided. Death is eventually going to come. And then he also saw an ascetic, sadhu, sannyasi, and saw that he was happy. He was truly happy. He was not sad or suffering, despite knowing that eventual suffering that is going to befall everybody. So seeing that, Prince Siddhartha at that point of time, he realized that the suffering, he has to do something to find if it is possible to get over this suffering. Is possible to, one is to remove the suffering, and his motivation was not just focused on finding his own happiness and eliminating his own suffering, but he was motivated by the compassion, the great compassion, to being able to find a solution that will not only benefit himself, but that he be able to find something, if possible, a solution that not only himself, he can guide all other beings to such a state of enlightenment. And initially, Prince Siddharth, he took teachings from some teachers. The two main of his teachers were Acharya Larakaram and Udreka. And by studying under those teachers, he very quickly attained the level of realizations which they had. But still, Buddha Shakyamuni was not satisfied. He still realized that even by attaining those high level of spiritual attainments, he has not completely, that those attainments are still not completely beyond suffering, that still the cycle of suffering is still there. So there's more to it. And so after that, he went on his own and did further practice, and eventually he attained enlightenment. Now, interestingly, it is said that after Buddha Shakyamuni attained enlightenment, he remained silent initially for 49 days. And then he was requested, then seeing the kings of Devas and Devis, once they sensed that here this person, Prince Siddharth, has attained enlightenment and he's become a Buddha, the awakened one. And the sole motivation of him pursuing this path, leaving everything behind and putting so much energy and effort, and finally when he found the solution, his motivation was compassion to help all beings, and the only way he can help all beings is by giving them teachings, and he's remaining silent. Why is he not telling others or guiding others based on what he himself has learned? So they came and requested the Buddhas, made prostrations to Shakyamuni Buddha and requested him to give the teachings. So of course, eventually then we all know that we have so many of Buddha's teachings that Buddha Shakyamuni, then he said, yes, okay, and then he started to give teachings. And the first verse, it is said that Lord Buddha spoke was the following: profound, peaceful, elaboration-free, clear light and non-composite. Such is the nectar-like Dharma I have discovered. Finding no one to fathom this teaching, in silence I will retire into the woods. So, just some of the points to take note of from this verse is that even this teaching itself, we cannot take literally, because as I mentioned earlier, that the primary motivation of Buddha Shakyamuni was the compassion to help other beings get rid of their suffering and to attain the highest state of happiness. And why Buddha attained enlightenment was to benefit all beings. And so if he says that in silence I will retire to the woods, of course he cannot mean that. He cannot mean that literally. So so I'm showing that verse not to go into its deeper meaning, but just to give more of a perspective of how we can take the teachings literally, where it needs, where we cannot take literally. So fine. After this, then, and how do we know that Buddha's main motivation was compassion and he wanted to benefit beings? Is because after that, throughout the remainder of his life, Buddha Shakyamuni, as we know, gave a vast array of teachings throughout his life until he attained Mahaparinirvana. And other important thing we can note from this verse is that, as Buddha Shakyamuni says in the second line, such is the nectar-like Dharma I have discovered. So here, one thing to note is that this Dharma, the profound Dharma that Buddha Shakyamuni finally realized, is not something that was bestowed upon him by someone else. It was not transferred into him or given to him as a blessing or something. It was through his own effort, through his learning, and that he came to realize this truth, the nature of reality, the profound truth, whose characteristics he has mentioned in the first line. So that is something else important point to take note of from this verse. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, that the main motivation of Buddha Shakyamuni was to benefit beings. And how can you benefit the beings? As he himself, through his own example, it is not by transferring your realizations and into somebody else, but it is by leading the beings, by guiding them, by giving them teachings. And this is what Buddha Shakyamuni did through the rest of his life. He taught the various audience, whoever came to sought guidance, he taught them. And as we know that the way Buddha Shakyamuni taught was not, he was not driven by, say, the idea to demonstrate his own knowledge to others, or say that, see, this is what I know, and such profound things I've learned, and I'm telling you all this. So, but since he was motivated to be able to benefit in the most effective and efficient manner his audience, his teachings were tailored according to the maturity level of the audience, because his audience would at times consist of very ordinary, normal people who may not have much, any background in, say philosophy or the nature of reality. He might simply speak about, give simple teachings to them, say, do no harm to others. And at the same time, there were many serious practitioners who have been themselves spiritually leading a spiritual life for past many lives, who also sought teaching from Buddha Shakyamuni. So for mature people, he would give more teachings on, like, say, nature of reality, profound nature of reality, and bodhicitta, which required some level of maturity. So we see that since his teachings were given depending on the audience, this led to, at later, as over a period of time, it would seem that some teachings were contradictory in themselves. So, for example, as I we can see from this slide, the first, at one time Buddha Shakyamuni taught that 5 aggregates are the burden or the load, and you, or the person, or the carrier of the loads. So 5 aggregates, and just I'm sure most of us would be familiar with these, but just to recapitulate. So we have body, we consist of body and our mind. So out of the 5 aggregates, one is the aggregate of body or form, and the mind is further subdivided into four aggregates. So the remaining 4 aggregates is the aggregate of feeling. So since feelings play a very important role in our decision making and our actions, so it is given a prominent, it is counted separately, the feeling. And the next aggregate is discrimination or discernment power, which deals more with our cognitive thinking and cognitive level decision making, since that is also, again, plays a very important role in our actions. So that is counted separately. And then the another aggregate is of compositional factors, which is kind of alludes to our habitual tendencies. And then the final aggregate related to mind is that aggregate of mental consciousness, which refers to the overall mind in general. So just to repeat, the 5 aggregates is one is our body or form, and then the remaining four based on the mind. And these 4 are aggregate of feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness. So Buddha Shakyamuni said that these five aggregates are like the burden or the load, and you are the carrier of the loads, you meaning the person. And the connotation here of Buddha's teaching being that somehow the person and these 5 aggregates, they are separable, they are 2 different entities, or that the self or the person, it exists independently of the body and the mind. So Buddha Shakyamuni gave this teaching, and on one occasion And then on another occasion, Buddha Shakyamuni said that karma and the ripening results exist. The ripening results of the karma, they exist. But the person who experiences the karmic results does not exist. Here, the connotation being the experience of the karmic experiencer of the karmic results, which is separate from the body and mind. That does not exist. So, as we can see that this is in direct seeming opposition with the previous teaching. Here, Buddha Shakyamuni is saying that there is no person or self that is separate from the five aggregates. Whereas in previous teaching, Buddha said that there is a person or being self separate from the five aggregates. And still on other occasions, Buddha Shakyamuni taught that all three realms is basically any all the existences, they can be categorized into these three realms of desire, form, and formless. All modes of existence, one can say, are just your own mind. That there's nothing that exists outside our mind. It is just our mind. Any kind of existence. And still on another occasion, Buddha Shakyamuni said that so all three realms are your mind, and in a way here what the connotation being that mind exists solidly, it exists as a solid entity in an independent manner, objective manner. But on another occasion, Buddha Shakyamuni said that even the mind does not exist in that fashion. It does not exist as truly real, independently as objectively. So this is in kind of seeming contradiction with the third teaching. So this is just some of the illustrations that I'm giving to show that the teachings which are on the surface, they appear to be in direct contradiction and very confusing to somebody who's studying them. And just to keep our initial goal in the mind, that why are we following the teachings? We are following the teachings to be able to identify the root cause of our suffering. And let's assume that the root cause of our suffering is the ignorance, and the ignorance is something that which misperceives the reality. So to eliminate the ignorance, we need to know what the reality is. How do we know that? How do we come to know about that? It is, excuse me. So we have to follow, say, if we say, let's say we're studying the Buddha Dharma. So we follow the words of the Buddha to know what the reality is. But as I have shown you in the previous slide, that there are some teachings, if we see that there are some teachings which say one thing and some teachings which say other, how do we decide which one to follow? And Buddha Shakyamuni is said to be the enlightened one, the omniscient one, and is honored by the epithets such as the teacher of men and gods. And the question arises, how can he be wrong? If he knows everything, why would he teach something wrong to somebody and something correct to somebody else? And moreover, it is said that to completely reject any teaching of the Buddha is said to be abandoning the Dharma. So how do we reconcile the seemingly contradictory teachings of the Buddha? And even if we say, take a particular teaching of the Buddha, some sutra as the final, on what basis? How can we conclude that that teaching is the final and it is not itself further, further interpretable to a more refined meaning? So there are various such questions which arise and which need to be answered. And so before we go into the details, further explore this topic, this situation is not that we as practitioners of today we are facing. Obviously, over a period of time, as Buddha Shakyamuni gave teachings over the years, this even the practitioners of the followers of the Buddha at that time, this question arises in fact at the time of the Buddha itself. So to give you one such illustration, very this what is popularly known as the three turning of the wheels of the Dharma. I'm sure if you've been attending teachings by Venerable Geshe or even at other places, you would be familiar with these. So what is said to be the first turning of the wheel of Dharma refers to the initial teachings that Buddha Shakyamuni gave at Sarnath near Varanasi. And the main topic was the Four Noble Truths. And obviously they were explained in quite detail there. But the main point that I'm trying to put here is when Buddha Shakyamuni taught there, he taught the Four Noble Truths as existing inherently, truly, independently, or inherently. And whereas the second wheel of turning of the wheel of Dharma, where it was given at Rajgriha in Bihar at a later time. And here the primary topic that Buddha Shakyamuni taught was teachings on emptiness. For example, Prajna Paramita Sutras, or we are all must be very familiar with the famous the Heart Sutra. So in these teachings, what Buddha Shakyamuni taught was that nothing exists truly or inherently. And this gave rise to the what is known as the Madhyamika school of thought, and the present-day Madhyamika school of thought. And the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, where Buddha Shakyamuni taught that things exist truly or inherently. The school of thoughts, the philosophical school of thoughts following this are primarily Vaibhashika and Sautantrika. So as we can see that the teachings that Buddha Shakyamuni gave in these two on these two occasions, they are again directly contradictory, and they deal with a very subtle nature of reality, things existing truly or inherently. And so later on, very high, it is said that at Vaishali, there were 10 very high level bodhisattvas, including such as bodhisattvas Maitreya and others. They asked 10 different questions to Buddha Shakyamuni. And the one of the questions asked by one of the bodhisattvas called Bodhisattva Paramarth Samudgata, that specifically that was related to this, to clarifying the doubt. Asked Buddha that on one occasion you taught that nothing exists inherently, and on another occasion you taught that things exist inherently. So we are confused. Obviously, because himself being a very high level bodhisattva, he himself was not confused. The bodhisattva Paramarth Samudgata was asking that question on behalf of the people who could not, who taking the teaching of the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, they were on the danger of taking it too nihilistically. So then Buddha Shakyamuni actually interpreted his own teachings. And his interpretation of these teachings led to the development of school known as Chittamatra. So just for the illustration, I'll just see how Buddha Shakyamuni interpreted his own teachings in the context of the third turning of the wheel of Dharma. So as you can see, there are two groups of I've created in this slide. So one is on the left side, which the top level heading says anything that comes to our mind, and one is on the right side, referred to as the three natures. So to clarify, Buddha Shakyamuni to interpret his own teachings, to clarify the seeming contradiction between the first and second turning of the wheel of Dharma, he based it on the basis of the three natures. So he said that so anything that comes to our mind on the left, if we focus, so what we can think of anything, so it may be something which is existent or something which is non-existent. So and then something which is existent. So non-existent thing, we leave it at there. There is no further subcategorization of that. Whereas something which is existent, we can further categorize into two further categories. It can be an impermanent thing, for example, a flower, or it can be a permanent thing. Now, impermanent things, we further leave it at that point. There is no further categorization. And permanent things, we further subcategorize into two. One is the ultimate reality, and anything else other than the ultimate reality. Permanent phenomena other than the ultimate reality. So, as we can see, anything that comes to our mind, if we just consider the bottom four nodes, which are not further subcategorized. So as I've labeled them A, B, C, D. A is the non-existent phenomena, B is the impermanent phenomena, C is the ultimate reality, and D is permanent phenomena other than ultimate reality. And on the other hand, there is another categorization of all the phenomena under the heading of three natures, which is imputed nature, other powered nature, and thoroughly established nature. So imputed nature basically refers to anything that is merely just an imputation of our mind. It does not exist in colloquial language, we can say, in a substantial or tangible manner, just coming from our mind. Purely our mental creation. So because both these two categorizations refer to all the any phenomena, there must be a correlation between these two categories. So this correlation I have shown with the help of these dashed arrows. So imputed nature basically encompasses non-existent phenomena, because anything which is non-existent, we can just think, for example, a sky flower, something, anything imaginary we can think of which does not exist. It is it comes purely from our mind. And likewise, the other thing which falls under imputed nature is permanent phenomena other than ultimate reality. Then other powered nature is simply refers to impermanent phenomena, because any impermanent phenomena, it comes into being under the influence of causes and conditions which are other than itself. So that is the connotation of other powered nature. And then finally, thoroughly established nature is another name we can say of ultimate reality. So not going into further much more details or analysis, what we are trying to I'm trying to convey here is that here how Buddha Shakyamuni tried to he interpreted his own teachings of first and second turnings of the wheel of the Dharma by dividing the phenomena in these three natures, and then saying that the imputed nature, when I meant that nothing exists, when I meant that nothing exists inherently or truly, I meant that imputed nature does not exist as truly or inherently. And when I meant that things exist truly or inherently, I meant the other powered nature and thoroughly established nature, they exist as truly. So this is an example how Buddha Shakyamuni interpreted his own teachings. So that was just an illustration, but how so now at the time of the Buddha, there was if somebody had any such confusion, needed clarification, of course they can directly approach and ask Buddha Shakyamuni. But in today's time, unfortunately, we don't have that. We are not so fortunate. And so if such confusion arises, how are we to resolve to see that which teachings can be interpreted and which are definite, that is, they don't need any further interpretation. So to deal with this extremely crucial issue, Buddha Shakyamuni is what are popularly known as the Four Reliances. So I'm sure most of us would be familiar with this. So it says that one should rely on the teaching and not the teacher's authority. So as we can see that it's very sadly quite true that many of us are simply influenced by seeing the popularity of a person, by seeing how many important followers that person has, or how important social state of a person is. These kind of things may initially motivate us to follow a person, but the first reliance is that we should not just be following somebody based on the other person's authority, but rather we should base our decision or rely on the teaching of a person. And then it further says that our sole purpose is ultimately to transform our own minds. And so that means that we need to go, we cannot just remain at the surface level, that at the mere words level. We need to rely on the meaning and not at the mere words. And but as we know that if we need to eliminate the subtlest layers of our afflictions, subtlest being the ignorance, even we cannot remain at the surface meaning of the things. We need to look at the final meanings of the teachings, final intent of the teachings. So we have to rely on the definitive meaning and not just the teachings which can be interpreted further. So we have to find at the deeper level, we have to rely on the definite teachings and not on the interpretive meaning. And even that, the definite meaning, that once we are able to get that meaning, we should not let it remain at the intellectual level, but one has to really to transform our minds. One has to really internalize and realize that directly. And that's where the fourth level says that rely on the non-conceptual wisdom, not on dualistic or conceptual cognition. So this is like a very broad overall guideline that is given that we can follow as a goal post, as how we can interpret or we can deal with the situations where we find ourselves getting confused with which teachings are interpretable and which are definite. So as I say, the third one, the crux of the matter lies here, that when it says rely on the definitive meaning and not the interpretable meaning. So what kind of meaning? What kind of teachings? How, as a student, we define which are definite and which are interpretable? How can we go about doing that? So again, this one very famous verse, which also is unique to Buddha Dharma, is what Buddha Shakyamuni said, that just, O wise, O bhikshu and wise men and women, just as a goldsmith tests the purity of gold by burning, cutting and rubbing the gold, you should also likewise examine my words and put them into practice, and not simply because you respect me. So as in Buddha Shakyamuni is clearly saying here that just because you respect me, or you should not follow my words or whatever I say just because of that, but rather you should rely on the analysis. You have to examine my words and see how, and then only you should follow them. So this is in kind of like an analogy of the four essentials that I just mentioned, that rely on the teaching and not the teacher. And in the third line, as it is saying, likewise examine my words. It goes into the deeper layer that within the teaching one should rely on the meaning and not just the interpretable meaning, but definite meaning. And then finally Buddha Shakyamuni sayings, and put them into practice, that ultimately one has to realize those teachings directly and non-conceptually. So the analogy here Buddha Shakyamuni is given is of how a goldsmith tests the gold. So three ways are mentioned, that burning, cutting and rubbing. So if we just want to test the surface purity of the gold, to see that at least the gold is pure on the surface and it's not just some metal inside like copper and with the pure just the coating of the gold. So if one burns the surface, one can easily check that at least on the surface it's not that the gold is just on surface, inside also it is gold only. So this is kind of a surface test, a grosser level of test for testing the purity of the gold. And if one is satisfied with that, then further to test whether inside, deep inside, it is still gold or not, one has to cut the gold. So one can cut and check if it is still gold inside or not. So that is this a more refined level of checking of the purification, the purity of the gold. And then once one knows that, yes, it is indeed gold, but to check the refineness of the gold, how fine the gold is, it is said by rubbing the gold. So I believe there was some way of by polishing the gold that one could tell how refined the gold was. So using this analogy, using this kind of analysis, Buddha Shakyamuni gave this analogy. Likewise, you should examine my words. So why do we need to analyze those words? What, as I said, that the final meaning is the final intent is to know the nature of reality. And reality of what? What do we need to know the reality of? Of course, the things which exist, things, the phenomena which exists. So to follow this analysis, we can the phenomena which exists, they can be categorized into three kinds: evident phenomena, slightly hidden phenomena, and a very hidden phenomena. So here, as the name suggests, evident phenomena refers to phenomena which is obvious to us. It's evident, it's obvious. We don't need any kind of reasoning or any kind of analysis to understand that. So as its basic definition says, it is any phenomena which can be discerned through direct perception. Direct perception meaning through our sense perception, our eyes, eye consciousness, ear consciousness, our eyes, ear, nose, taste, touch, and so on. For example, if I see a flower, I know that it's a flower. I don't need somebody else or some kind of reasoning to know that it is a flower. Or if I hear somebody calling my name, so I know that I heard somebody calling me. That doesn't need any kind of clarification or interpretation. This is obvious and evident phenomena. And then at the second level, we have slightly hidden phenomena. So this refers to any phenomena which is discerned through reasoning and analysis, through valid inference or reasoning. And it is something which is we cannot know, or it is not evident to through our sense perceptions. And for example, we can, as an example, we can take subtle impermanence. So we know that the gross impermanence is like, that things come into being through causes and conditions, and then eventually they are destroyed, or they are no longer there. Anything that in our day-to-day lives, as we observe that things, we buy something new and then it gets broken, and that's kind of gross impermanence. But subtle impermanence here, subtle impermanence, by subtle impermanence, we mean that it's not just that things come into being and then stay over a period of time and then they get broken, or they are no longer there. But anything which exists is actually any such phenomena which has come about by causes and conditions, impermanent phenomena. It is not only impermanent at the gross level, but it is also changing moment by moment. Every single moment it is changing. Now, it is, if we think, it is not evident to us. It is not, our eyes cannot see it, we cannot hear it, smell it, or taste it, the thing. And our natural habits are actually otherwise. Things seem to be very solid and unchanging to us, whereas they are changing moment by moment. But if we put a little bit effort and do some reasoning and analysis, we can come to realize that there is subtle impermanence of any phenomena which has gross impermanence. For example, if we take the example of a tree, and we know that is say 100 years old, and it seems so solid and unchanging to us, but we know that when initially the seed was planted 100 years earlier, there was nothing, that tree was not there. So there must be some change which would have happened over a period of 100 years. And likewise, if we go back 50 years, when the tree was 50 years old, as the change which happened over 100 years, in the initial 50 years also, some change would have happened. And then if we go down in likewise manner from 50 to its initial 25 years, say, the change which has happened in the initial 50 years, some of that change would have happened in its initial 25 years also. It's not possible that no change happened in the 25 years and suddenly all the change happened only in remaining 25 years. So if we keep going down like this, we can go down to say the initial first year, that out of these 25 years, some change would have happened in the first year also. And then in the first year, we can divide into 365 days. So in the initial day also, there would have been some change that would have contributed to the overall change in the whole year. And that day we can divide into 24 hours. So the change over 24 hours, there would have been some change over first hour. Likewise, we can come down to at second, millisecond, microsecond, nanosecond, and saying that even at the very, very micro level of the time, there would have been some change happening, which is subtle impermanence. And so this is just an illustration of how using some reasoning analysis, we can get to some phenomena. So this is an example of slightly hidden phenomena. And then the third category is the very hidden phenomena. So any phenomena which cannot be discerned through direct perception or through valid inference, but only through the authority of someone else's words. So that is very hidden phenomena. So for example, if one very simple but interesting example is knowing one's own birthday. The only way that one knows one's birthday is through the authority of one's parents. One cannot see it directly, evidently, because when one was born, in a way, we cannot see that. And then it's not something that your birthday you can find out through reasoning or analysis. It's only through the authority of somebody else that one can know about such kind of phenomena. And another such example would be the law of karma. It is also said to be a very hidden phenomena. So so here in the context of the teaching of hermeneutics, as I said, that we are trying to analyze here the main theme is how do we analyze Buddha's teachings to know that which are definitive in meaning and which are interpretable in meaning. And so what the teachings represent, our ultimate aim is to know the nature of reality, and reality of what? Reality of the phenomena. And all phenomena can be categorized in these three categories. And very interestingly, or to a great degree, the ultimate reality or the true final reality of the things, it lies in the domain of slightly hidden phenomena, which means that at least at an intellectual level, we can use reasoning and analysis to identify which views correspond to reality and which not. So this immediately gives us a tool to be able to analyze the teachings. So how do we go about analyzing the teachings of the Buddha, even by using reasoning and analysis, to know that which tally with the reality and which teachings don't? So as we know that there are three kinds of wisdom, which the wisdom derived through learning, through reflection, and through meditation. Again, they are quite similar to the Four Reliances and that I mentioned ago. So to be able to really reason about a teaching, one has to first know what the teachings are, which is obvious. So that is the first step, by gaining knowledge of the teachings, of the various thoughts of the Buddha that are there in his teachings. And we can only acquire that by study, listening to the teachings, through different kind of means. And that is, once one has acquired, that is wisdom derived through learning. And it is kind of, they say that it's a borrowed knowledge. It's not one's own, it's kind of, one has gathered the information through various sources. Now the next level, one has to then here it becomes begins the analysis part, that we have to analyze on the basis of what one has learned. And for the analysis part, then one uses the tools of reasoning, logic, and then reflecting on the meaning that one has ascertained at the intellectual level. And then based on that, as one progresses, one can see that which accord with the reasoning and which do not accord with the reasoning. And when one has ascertained that, gain conviction in that process, then the wisdom which one derives through that is the wisdom derived through reflection. Here, the knowledge that one what borrowed in the first step, wisdom derived through learning, it becomes kind of one's own knowledge as one is analyzed, and by reflecting on it, one has gained certainty in that knowledge, and so it becomes one's own knowledge. And so that is wisdom derived through reflection. But then again, this understanding is more at the intellectual level. To really transform our minds, one has to really internalize that meaning and repeatedly meditate or reflect on the final meaning. Here, analysis is in the third step. Analysis has already happened. One has ascertained the final meaning. But to internalize, one has to repeatedly familiarize and reflect and meditate. And when one actually internalizes and gain a direct, initially a conceptual and then a direct realization of the meaning, then the wisdom, it is refers to the wisdom derived through meditation. And as I mentioned, these are when one can relate them to the four reliances. So as one progresses through this process of study, reflection, and meditation, of course, one goes through it gradually, and as one progresses through it, then one would come to know that which teachings tally with reality and which don't, based on one's own analysis and understanding. And as I mentioned earlier, one would gain this understanding that some teachings that Buddha taught were for the audience which were not so mature in their thought process or their background, while some were meant for who were more mature. And then on this ground, oneself will be able to come to realize that the teachings of the Buddha can be divided, or they are divided into two categories: the definitive teachings and the interpretative teachings. So more precisely, what do we mean by the definitive and interpretative teachings or interpretative meanings? So there are two ways to understand them. One is a more general way, is definitive versus interpretable nature in relation to the subject matter. And then further more refined is definitive versus interpretable nature in relation to the teaching itself. So what do we mean? So just to illustrate what we mean by definitive versus interpretable when we are talking about the subject matter. So for example, if we say that, for example, the human hand is made of wood, we know that this is something which is clearly invalid. Yeah, it's something which is kind of does not make any sense. And in the teachings, or the Buddha believes in a permanent self. So at least anybody who follows the teachings of the Buddha, the first seal which states all composite things are impermanent, and the four seals are what demarcate Buddha's teachings from the non-Buddhist teachings. So they would immediately see that this is again an invalid statement in this context. So the subject matter can be invalid and can be valid. For example, human hand is made of skin, bones, etc. This refers to a valid subject matter. But again, within something which is valid, we can have something which is gross, very, very straightforward, and something which is subtle. For example, if we say that human hand is illusion-like, this is a valid statement, but it's a subtle statement. One cannot immediately easily see this or come to realize this. So these are just illustrations of subject matter. So we can say that the subtlest of the subject matter is known as the definitive meaning, if the subject matter is subtlest, that means that it cannot be refined any further. There's no further to go, no further understanding to be gained. That is the final understanding of that subject matter. So that has the connotation of something being definite or definitive or final. Whereas anything else, all other are interpretable meanings because they can be interpreted further and are not final in nature. So now, in relation to the teachings, and particularly here, the Buddha's teachings, which teachings of the Buddha are definitive and which are interpretable? Or how do we define definitive or interpretable teachings of the Buddha? So here, the three main schools of the higher schools of the Buddhist school, they address this very important division, and they precisely define how to distinguish between these two kind of teachings. And these schools are the Chittamatra or mind only school, and then we have Sotantrika Madhyamika school and Prasangika Madhyamika school. Excuse me. So we are not going to go into the details of the specific schools or their views or philosophy, but rather how, from their point of view, they understand or they define definitive teachings versus interpretable teachings. So how the Chittamatra or mind-only school, it defines the definitive teaching of the Buddha. It says that any teaching of the Buddha which can be accepted literally, which means at its face value, is the definitive teaching. And as its counterpart, the interpretable teaching is any teaching of the Buddha which cannot be accepted literally or at its face value. That is the interpretable teaching. So it's quite straightforward definition which they have given. And so some of the illustrations which we can see here is, let's say the teaching, very, very straightforward teaching. If Buddha Shakyamuni says that do not harm anyone or be kind to others. So this teaching from this, since we can take this teaching literally, that one should not harm anybody, or be kind towards others. From this point of view, Chittamatra point of view, this comes under the definitive teaching. Whereas, likewise, if he says all composite things are impermanent, which is the first seal of the Buddha's teachings, again, this can be accepted literally. So this again is a definitive teaching as per the Chittamatra point of view. Now, the teaching which I mentioned earlier, that all five aggregates are loads and you are the load carrier, where it is indicated that there is a person which is separate from the five aggregates. Now, this teaching, no school of the Buddha, no Buddhist school can accept this literally, because the fourth seal of the Buddha, the fourth seal says that everything is the nature of emptiness and selflessness, where there's a connotation being that there is no self accepting separate or independently of the five aggregates. So then this makes this teaching not literally acceptable, and therefore this teaching is not definitive teaching but rather interpretable teaching from the Chittamatra point of view. So if anybody has any clarification or questions, please pause me and feel free to ask. I'm just going through, and if something is not clear or something is confusing, please feel free to ask the question to clarify. So as I mentioned, the three schools, Chittamatra school, then Sutantrika Madhyamika, and then Prasangika Madhyamika. So just to mention that these are mentioned in the order of the subtlety, the increased level of subtlety in which they approach the final reality or the true nature of the things. The reality as defined gets progressively more refined and subtler. Prasangika is said to be the highest, said to present the highest view, and then Sutantrika Madhyamika followed by Chittamatra. So initially we defined definitive teachings versus interpretable teachings from the Chittamatra point of view. Now we first look at the definition of definitive versus interpretable from the Prasangika Madhyamika point of view, which is said to be the highest, presenting the highest view. So they define the definitive teaching as any teaching of the Buddha whose primary subject matter is the ultimate reality as the definitive teaching. And likewise, any teaching of the Buddha whose primary subject matter is not the ultimate reality, that is the interpretable teaching. So it is interesting to note the difference as compared to how Chittamatra defined. And in case of Chittamatra, their focus is more on how a teaching is expressed. How a teaching is expressed, whether one can accept that literally or not, based on that they make this distinction. Whereas only in the case of Prasangika, the focus is more on what is expressed in a teaching, what is the subject matter. What is the primary main subject matter. If the main subject matter is the ultimate reality, then it is a definitive teaching. Otherwise, it is interpretable teaching. So to look at some of the illustrations from the Prasangika Madhyamika point of view, again, if we consider the first seal of the Buddha's teachings, that all composite things are impermanent, as we saw that from the Chittamatra point of view, this can be accepted literally, and therefore it is a definitive teaching. But from the Prasangika Madhyamika point of view, because this teaching does not, the main subject matter is not related to the ultimate reality. And the ultimate reality, just from the Prasangika Madhyamika point of view, is the emptiness of objective existence, or one can simply say the emptiness is the final view, or the true nature of things from Prasangika Madhyamika point of view. So with that, from that perspective, all composite things are impermanent, even though it can be accepted literally from Chittamatra point of view. It does, since its primary subject matter is not the ultimate reality from Prasangika point of view, it is an interpretable teaching as per Prasangika Madhyamika. And all five aggregates are loads and you are the load carrier. This is again interpretable teaching, because again, this does not deal with ultimate reality. In fact, it is not accepted by any Buddhist school as literally acceptable. Then if we talk about the third seal of Buddha's teachings, that everything is of the nature of emptiness and selflessness, because here the primary subject matter is the ultimate reality as per Prasangika Madhyamika. This is definitive teaching as per Prasangika Madhyamika. And the fourth seal of the Buddha's teaching, the transcending sorrow is nirvana or true peace. Again, this is an interpretable teaching, because the primary subject matter is not the ultimate reality. So again, these are just few illustrations of on what basis this school bifurcates between the teachings of Buddha as being definitive and interpretable. And then finally we come to this division based on from the point of view of the Swatantrika Madhyamika school. So they form kind of take from both the Chittamatra and Prasangika Madhyamika, and they define the definite teachings as the teachings of the Buddha which can be accepted literally or at its face value, and whose primary subject matter is the ultimate reality as the definitive. So basically, they have taken both the criteria from Chittamatra and Prasangika, and they say that if both criteria hold, then it is a definitive teaching. And Analogously, interpretable teaching for them is any teaching of the Buddha which either cannot be accepted literally or at face value, or whose primary subject matter is not the ultimate reality, is the interpretable teaching. And so, as I mentioned, it combines both the Chittamatra and the Prasangika definitions or views on the definitive and interpretable. So, just we go through some examples here. As I said, all composite things are impermanent. So Chittamatra took it as definitive teaching because it was literally acceptable to them, while the Prasangika school took it as interpretable teaching because its primary subject matter is not the ultimate reality. If we follow the definition of Sutantrika Madhyamika, we see that it cannot be, it can be accepted literally, but its primary subject matter is not the ultimate reality. So therefore, it will be interpretable according to Sutantrika Madhyamika. Whereas the teaching on the Heart Sutra, this is something which is accepted as a definitive teaching by Sutantrika Madhyamika because it fulfills both the criteria. It can be accepted literally, and its primary subject matter is ultimate reality, as per Sutantrika Madhyamika. And then there were teachings where Buddha Shakyamuni said that nothing exists objectively or truly. This teaching, these kind of teachings, because even though their primary subject matter is ultimate reality, but it cannot be accepted literally or its face value as per Sutantrika Madhyamika. So even these kind of teachings become interpretable according to Sutantrika Madhyamika. But because their primary subject matter is indeed the ultimate reality, they are definitive according to Prasangika Madhyamika. So I think it. So to summarize, I'm just gone through the definitions according to three schools of definitive versus interpretable. The definitive, the whole idea or the reason or the requirement to make this distinction between the teachings of the Buddha as definitive or interpretable is to know or to come to a final conclusion that okay, this is the final intent of the Buddha, the final truth, which cannot be interpreted any further. And the most so as a practitioner or the follower of the path, this is what one has to realize. One has to know the true nature of the reality. And once one is ascertained through reasoning and analysis that this is the final meaning of the Buddha's teachings, the definitive meaning, which once one has gained conviction in through reasoning and analysis, then one, after having gained the confidence, then one can pursue it further by meditation and really utilizing that for transforming one's own mind. So it's like any teaching that touches that, the final reality as the primary object, that has the connotation of the definitive teaching. So my sense I've covered and the main theme of in the today's talk. If somebody has questions, so we can take some questions. Otherwise, we can do 10 minutes of some meditation to get some idea or understanding that what is the implication of really understanding the true nature of reality for our own practice. And as we said that for eliminating our afflictions, that the main purpose is of all this discussion and the teachings is for practical purposes is to be able to transform our minds. And so how knowing the actual reality, it really plays a very important role in that. So, is it okay if we do a brief meditation of 5 minutes, or some questions, or how should we proceed?
I request all the participants here to kindly raise any doubts or any questions if you have. And I can see that there are quite many numbers of viewers from our YouTube live. So I request all the viewers from our YouTube live to kindly raise or kindly write your question in a comment box if you have. Mr. Angitji, meanwhile they will write the question. I think you can continue with the meditation for 5 minutes.
Okay. Okay. So what we can do is, if we are comfortable, we can sit comfortably, and we can close our eyes for this meditation. This is more of an analytical meditation, and more like guided meditation. And so we can bring to our mind any person who is close to us, who we feel very much affectionate towards, being it our parents, uh, our child, our partner, or siblings, could be anybody. So bringing such a person to our mind, we examine how our emotional reaction, how do we feel towards such a person. We see a sense of great affection and and love flowing, and at the same time we see our perception is of the person is very solid, that person exists very solidly out there, independent of us, independent of our mind. Then with this in mind, we then go closer towards that person, and close enough mentally we go close enough to the person where we can see begin to see the inside, the thin layer of the skin, and besides, beneath that skin, all the other organs, tissues. What we are now seeing, the kidneys, lungs. From this close distance, we are seeing the skeleton, even the blood. Now, seeing all these things when this close, when we are so close and we are perceiving these things, are we perceiving that person? Our earlier perception, is it there? We realize that it is no longer there. That perception disappears. And when we are seeing all these organs, liver, kidneys, gallbladder, etc., are we still having that feeling of affection, the attachment, feeling of love flowing towards these organs? It's not there. Rather, a feeling of aversion or a push can arise. These are not very nice to see from so close enough. But what is changed from the side of the object, from the side of the person? From the person side, nothing is changed. Only thing that is changed is our own perception. Where we were earlier having a sense of attachment or attraction, now we are having a feeling of aversion. And if we still go closer towards these organs or the bones, let's say we are looking at them through an electron microscope now. What we are seeing there are now large number of atoms, bunch of atoms just colliding with each other. Now, where is the person that we had originally brought to our mind? That person, can we see that person? Is it there? No, that person has disappeared. What we are now seeing is just a large number of atoms just moving and banging into each other at high speed. And what is our emotional reaction now like? It's neither of attraction nor of aversion. It's kind of neutral. Again, we ask ourselves, from the side of the object, what has changed? We realize that nothing is changed from the side of the object. Only it is our perception of the object which has changed. And as our perception of the object changes, we realize so does our emotional reaction. And so, the closer we go towards the object, the closer we go towards realizing the reality of that object. So as we are seeing the atoms, none of which are the person. So where is the person? It is no longer there. We realize it is empty from the side of the object. It is our own perception. So slowly we gradually come out of this meditation, and so the idea of this meditation was to gain an idea of how our understanding or perception of the reality, it makes us transform our mind and gains the more refined our understanding of things are, of reality are, uh, how it can really help us in transforming our minds and finally eliminating our ignorance and eliminating our suffering and finally attaining the final state of peace and happiness. Uh, any questions, Tenzinla?
Mr. Ankitla, I think there is no question from the participants.
Okay.
So shall we conclude now?
Okay.
Do you have anything to say, Mr. Ankitla?
I think I was able to give some idea about the hermeneutics of today's topics of the behind interpretative and definitive meanings. What is its significance? Main thing is what is its significance and how one can go about understanding this division and understanding its meaning.
Yeah. Oh, okay, Mr. Ankitla. So, I cannot see any questions now. So, shall I conclude now, Mr. Ankitla?
Okay, then I think that will be all from my side.
Okay. So, with this, we have come to the end of today's program. And on behalf of Tibet House, New Delhi, I would like to thank our today's speaker, Mr. Angitla, for a very enlightening and for a wonderful presentation today. Thank you so much for your time and for your knowledge, Mr. Angitla. And I also want to thank all the participants for joining today's session. Thank you all.
Thank you, Tanzila, and thanks to all the participants for listening to me. It's really
Thank you,
kind
Mr.
of all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.